But let's jump in. I know we've got, we're just at the 1 o'clock hour. There's a lot I want to go over today. But we are going to be diving into today session 2 of the PowerPoint Masterclass. I like to give the names to everything, so I called it in medias res, which is Latin for in the middle of things. I actually wanted to call it The Reckoning, but that actually didn't make any sense. But it felt more like a sequel. But we're covering a whole bunch of different items, so how we go about, I couldn't just call it, add and replace, because we're doing a whole bunch of other things. So we had the basics. Today we're kind of getting into the meat and potatoes of everything. And then next Monday we're going to kind of wrap everything up with some of the higher end features that you probably aren't taking full advantage of. But with that, we are actually going to be looking at, let's take a real quick recap of what happened last week. Just so, it's a Monday. If you're like me, kind of probably have already started forgetting stuff that happened this morning. So how can we expect to remember what happened last week? But real quick, we went over 3 main items last week. We talked about, kind of getting yourself prepared, and there was a series of questions we kind of were going through. After that, we talked about the functionality of the LeaderGuide Pro PowerPoint content blocks, the slide content block, and the slide note content block. That is going to become a little bit more apparent why that's important today as well as next week. And then we went quickly through how can we build out a guidebook directly from PowerPoint, and then also how do we create PowerPoints from an existing guidebook. So that's where we started from. And just as a reminder, the high level questions we were going to look at, and we're going to reference back to these today as we go through it. But where was your slide deck located? Are there notes with your slide? Is there relevant text on your slide? Are there hidden slides? Do you have a structure or outline already in place? Do we have sections in our PowerPoint? Are your notes formatted? Do you have multiple decks? So all of these are items that we're going to be we're going to reference to all of these throughout this masterclass. But having the answers, how you would answer some of these questions or all of these questions really are going to help determine the best practices or the best ways for you to go about doing it yourself. All right, so with that being said, we are going to look at, what are we going off covering today? So we're going to start off with slide numbering. How do we handle, the numbering within our documents? We're going to look at the add and replace. From there, we're going to be adding, how do we create the table of contents when we're starting from PowerPoint? What if we need to add selective slides, or do we have multiple decks we want to bring in? How do we update that slide numbering within the document? In here, I should have said, but wait, there's more. But after that, the last things we're going to look at is at the replace function. Are we replacing all the slides? What if we just need to replace a few slides, so, specific or selective slides? If we're using the restart by module, how do we do replacement with that? And then what about if we need to remove slides from our document? So these are, that's just the brief, the brief items we're going to be covering today. But with that being said, I know we're already about 4 or 5 minutes into this, so let's dive in and let's get going. So first item on our list was talking about slide numbering. And what do I mean by slide numbering? So in this, the slide numbering is how do we handle the slides, and here I'll pop over to actual Word so we can see this. When we're looking at a PowerPoint or a LeaderGuide Pro document, how do we handle the slide numbering for each slide content block, right? So we see slide 1, slide 2, slide 3. How does this go about, how do we handle that in our guidebook? So where we're going to actually look to do this is on the slide or on the LeaderGuide Pro Preferences panel. And this is where we're going to see a dialog box where we can set specific items we want to have happen every time we build out a LeaderGuide Pro document. So there's other things in here other than just slide numbering, but this is where we're gonna set what our preference is. How we actually get to this actual slide or to the preferences panel is, and here I'll hop back into LeaderGuide Pro. Two places we can actually see this happen. If you're in LeaderGuide Pro and you drop down the Parts button, so the third section from the right-hand side, we can come down and we can launch LeaderGuide Pro Preferences. This will get us into the Preferences dialog box where we can set our options. So we can get to it from here. Or if you are building out a guidebook directly, if we click on, when we're on the Start a New Guidebook dialog box, the first one that comes up, we have a button for Preferences, so you can get into it in here as well. So this is how we get to the Preferences, where we can set up our slide numbering as well as other options we want to have happen every time we build a document until we make changes. But what we're looking at when we're looking at this dialog box, we're actually going to be diving into kind of the middle section about slide numbering. And we have three options where it comes to here. Do you want to do sequential? Do you want to do absolute? Or do you want to go with restart by module? What these actually mean, and you will actually, if you click on the LeaderGuide Pro logo on the Preferences dialog box, you can actually pull up text help. And actually, let me just show you that real quick, just so you can see it. So on the Preferences dialog box, we're actually now looking at at LeaderGuide Pro live, not screenshots that I was showing just a moment before. But if I click here on this LeaderGuide Pro logo, it will pull up text help for this specific dialog box. And so you can get all the information about everything in the Preferences panel, but there is information in here on the slide numbering as well. So if you forget kind of what we talk about, it's all in here as well. But these three options, as we go through them, we have the sequential. What that actually means for us, sequential this is the default option. If you don't set anything, you're going to be set up for your slide numbering to be set up as sequential, which basically means it's a consecutively numbered 1 through however many slides you've brought in, right? So if you've got one deck and you went 1 through, there's 45 slides in your PowerPoint deck, it'll be slide content block 1 through 2, 3, all the way down to 45. If you brought in a second deck, right? So if 45 is where we ended, the first slide of our second deck would start off at slide 40, the slide block count 46, as it goes through. So it's just going to be 1 through however many total slides are in our LeaderGuide Pro document is how it's set up. When we want to update that slide, maybe we've added a few slides, we've removed them, we would use a feature, and we're going to go through it in a few items from now, update all fields to rebuild that. So sequential is it's a simple way, just 1 through however many. If you're running with one PowerPoint deck, more than likely this is what you're going to be using. Absolute, probably one that's not, it's probably the least used, but this is in place if you want to basically have your slide numbers match your PowerPoint exactly. So if you've gone in, you've marked to have slides not to be extracted, or you've chosen to skip slides that are in the deck for whatever reason, but you want it so it would be slide content block 1, and we're showing this slide, and we're not showing slides 2 or 3. So the next slide block we want to see is slide 4, and you want it to say slide content block 4 above, or slide 4 above the LeaderGuide Pro slide icon. You'd want to use absolute. Last one, restart by module. This basically says whenever a new module starts in LeaderGuide Pro, it's going to start at slide content block 1. So if module 1, we've got a PowerPoint deck, it's got 10 slides, module 1 be slides 1 through 10. when our second module starts, it would start over at slide 1 through however many. So it is sequential, but it is sequential at the module level, not at the document level. This is if you're using multiple decks and your decks are tied to each module, this is a good way to go. There is some additional levels, a few additional steps, I should say, when it comes time to replacing out slides in a LeaderGuide Pro document if you are restart by module. Last thing I will say on this is that the absolute and restart by module are mutually exclusive. You can't be restart by module and be absolute, or absolute with a restart by module. It's either one or the other. So just something to keep in mind. Any questions on that? All right. So after that, let's talk about add versus replace. Right? This is the basically add and replace is what LeaderGuide Pro does when it's working with PowerPoint. Are we adding slides? Are we replacing slides? And so I think it's important to know what each one does and when we should use it. So if we look at the add function, and the add function happens two ways. When we first build out a LeaderGuide Pro document, right? You've saved the doc, you've filled out the dialog boxes, and we get to that proverbial fork in the road where it says, "Are you ready to add images to your document now?" If we say yes, this kicks off the add function. It just kind of incorporated into the whole beginning of the document. So we can do the add function here. We can also do the add function by right off of the LeaderGuide Pro ribbon by getting into the controls section, which is the middle section of the ribbon, and go under special, and we can choose add. Either one will do this. But what add does, and this is my really high-tech graphics on this, when we're building a guidebook, add will basically take whatever slides are being brought in, whatever slide deck is, and drop it at the bottom of our document. So when we first start building out a document, it will give you a shell document, right? It gives you all the upfront templates. It gives you a new module page. It gives you a new lesson page. And if we've said, yes, we want to add images to our document now, it kicks off that add function. And at the bottom of our document, which would be at the bottom of our first lesson, it drops in our slides. So it basically takes all the images, our slides, converts them to images. If we've chosen to bring over notes, it takes all those items and it puts them at the bottom of our document. If we were to add in a second document or a second PowerPoint deck, it makes images of all those slides. It brings in if we've chosen to bring over our notes, it would bring all those in and it goes at the bottom of our document. So add truly is about taking our slides, putting them at the bottom of our document. You can't add slides into the middle, or you can't use the add function to put slides into the middle of the document, right? So if you've built out, let's say a series of modules, and then you're like, oh, I need, a module on XYZ, you can't take a PowerPoint deck, drop it into the middle of the document just using add. You can get to it, we just have to go through a few other levels. But high level, add takes your slides, slides and notes, whatever we've chosen, drops it at the bottom of our document. All right, so that gives us add. The replace function, we can only get to this one way, and that's in the special, or in the control section, drop down special, and we choose replace. Replace, what this looks for, it looks for the slide content blocks. Right? So in a LeaderGuide Pro document, it's looking for all the different slide content blocks, and it's gonna function, or it's gonna work with those. At at the highest level, it's going to basically, it looks for each of the slide content blocks, slide 1 through however many. It's then going to look at the actual PowerPoint at the different slides, right? So in this example, I'm just using 4 slides, 4 slide content blocks in the LeaderGuide Pro document, 4 slides, slides 1 through 4 out of my PowerPoint deck. And it basically will convert those slides into images, and it then brings those into our LeaderGuide Pro document. So it matches slide content block to the corresponding slide number in our PowerPoint deck. So this is why slide numbering matters. Right? So if we've gone in and we add in a new slide into our PowerPoint deck, we're going to have to make sure we get corresponding slide content block into our facilitator guide or our participant guide, whichever guidebook it is, so that when we do a replace, it can match those up. Or, if are we doing absolute or are we doing restart by module, it's going to determine how we need to handle those replace functions. All right. So high level, right? Add and replace, that's what it is. Wrong button. Next one that we want to go into off of this is, and this is the last one that's kind of before we really dive into LeaderGuide Pro itself, but just wanted to give us a little bit of background so that we have a better foundation to start from. If we're going to create a table of contents in LeaderGuide Pro from PowerPoint, right? We can build table of contents a couple ways in LeaderGuide Pro, but in this case, because it's our PowerPoint Masterclass, we're looking at it from the idea of we're building from PowerPoint. So the building out of the table of contents from PowerPoint happens when we're in that add function of LeaderGuide Pro. In this series of dialog boxes, and we'll see these live in a moment, there's a dialog box that's called Create TOC or TOC Outline Markers. And in this, it's kind of broken down. This dialog box is doing a few different things. And if we look at it at the highest level, on the left-hand side, that white dialog box, this is showing us all the slides, slide 1 through however many in our document, or in our PowerPoint document, I should say. And what we're looking to do on this is put in a series of meta tags where we can insert, basically a module and a lesson, or just a lesson, where needed, and these meta tags are going to become our, basically what would be our heading 1s and heading 2s in a table of contents. The way we manipulate those is on the right-hand side of the dialog box. So in that little white box at the top of the page, or at the top, and the top of this section, was where we would type in the name of our module or lesson. And if we want to add in a module, you type in the name of that module, click the little green plus next to module, and it would add a meta tag above the slide that we've highlighted on the left-hand side of the dialog box. If we want to remove a tag, just an individual one, you would highlight that tag, the module tag, and click minus, or the lesson name and click minus. We can move those tags up and down, right? Maybe we've got them in, but they're not in the right place. You can use the up and down arrows to do that. You need to rename a lesson or a module or lesson before you bring everything in. You can highlight the meta tag, type in the name, and just click replace the icon, that AB to AC next to replace name, and it would it basically updates the meta tag name. Or you want to mark a slide to not be extracted, right? Highlight the slide in that left-hand side, the white box. Click the do not extract, the little circle with the line through it. It would mark it to not come out. On here, you also have the little TV icon. If you click that, it will open up your default web browser. It will take you to the help videos, and you can match up the help video to the dialog box you're on. And the little question mark, there isn't a LeaderGuide Pro logo on this dialog box, but if you click on the question mark, it will open up the text help for you as well. on this dialog box, the bottom three choices, erase all TOC markers. When you, well, this actually plays into effect to the right-hand side. But if you've already used LeaderGuide Pro, or if you've already marked up a PowerPoint using LeaderGuide Pro, let's say brought into a previous facilitator guide or somebody else did, it may already have those markers on there for modules and lessons. If you don't want them all, if you don't want to individually remove those, you could click erase all TOC markers, and it would basically wipe off everything that's, all those meta tags on the left-hand side of that dialog box. Or maybe someone had put sections into their PowerPoint as they were building it, but those sections didn't necessarily line up to your modules and lessons. You could erase those because the sections are actually going to show up as lessons on that left-hand side of the dialog box. So that's what erase all TOC markers does. Once you have all the markers set up the way you want them in your guide, in that PowerPoint, when you save it, it saves all that information in the background of slide 1 of your PowerPoint deck. So if you were to launch it a second time, to use it a second time to build something out, all those markers are already in there. And the little X close button, basically finishes out this process, this dialog box, and brings us to the last dialog box of the add function. So that's, as we work through it, that's kind of what this dialog box does. And I want to just take a little bit of time here because this probably, of the whole, bringing over PowerPoints, this is probably the area you're going to spend the most amount of time in it. If you use this to put in your table of contents or get your core structure in place, but it also is what jumpstarts you that much further down the line. So I wanted to give it, plenty of time for us to kind of talk through. All right, questions on that? All right, so let's actually dive into this and let's actually put this into play. All right, so we're going to jump over, get into Word itself. I will point out, let me bring this over just so we can see it. I've got a PowerPoint deck. I've actually got a few, but we're going to use this one. It's got five slides, got some notes in it, just so we can see, actually put this into play. So I'm going to build out, we'll get back over to Word. I'm going to start a new LeaderGuide Pro document. And so I'm going to come over on the LeaderGuide Pro ribbon. I'm going to click on that, in the Start section, the File button, the New button, which kicks off our dialog box. And so I can, give this a name. Make all my choices. The one thing I'm going to do on this for us right now is I'm going to come under Preferences. And I'm going to set my slide numbering preferences for restart by module, just because of some of the items we have coming up. What I will point out, and I should have said this before, slide numbering, you probably don't want to be mixing and matching at, document by document. Kind of set what you want to have at the organizational level. Because if if one document's set up as restart by module and the next one is set up as sequential, LeaderGuide Pro is just looking at doesn't look at the document by document level. It looks at what's your setting in LeaderGuide Pro, so things can get a little funky if you've got ones set up in several different ways. But I'm going to click OK here. Right, and at this point, LeaderGuide Pro, it's obviously building out. We saw it last week. As you've used LeaderGuide Pro, you've seen this before. It takes all those individual templates, it's stitching them together, right? And those are based off those customizable collections. We get prompted by Word to save. So we're waiting here as it's applying the final bits of the style guide for that proverbial fork in the road question that's going to come up about, are you ready to add images to your document now? This one here. So this is, if I say yes, this kickstarts that add function, right? If I say no, I end up with just the shell document, which is all the upfront material, plus a new module, a blank new module, and a blank new lesson page. So add is going to take the slides that I'm going to bring in and put them at the bottom of my shell document, which would be right on that new lesson page. But I'm going to say yes to add these in. Right? We'd make our choices of where we want to put things. But I wanted to come in, and actually on here again, we're going to choose our PowerPoint deck, and so I'll choose the one I want. But this is the dialog box that I wanted to really dive into today. On this, or in this section, I should say, for today. Right? This is about the table of content outline markers. So because this is, kind of one of my demonstration files, notice I already have on the left-hand side of this dialog box, I already have some tags in there. So this is where I could, if I wanted to, move things up and down. I could highlight that tag. I can move them up and down. If I didn't want them at all, I could erase, erase all the markers. Or if I just wanted to get rid of, let's say lesson 1.2, I could click on the red minus next to lesson name to take that out. Now, when this normally comes up, if you're not sharing your screens, generally what you're going to see is you will see behind the outline markers dialog box, you will see your PowerPoint. So as we click through this list on the left-hand side, the slide itself will change. So the idea here is I could come in, right, and let's say I'm going to erase all my TOC markers. But I could come in, let's say slide 1 I know is falling into my first module, and I could call this, highlight it, type in the name, so we'll call this introduction. And if I click the green plus next to module, right, and this, where we think, with LeaderGuide Pro, right, we use a structure. We have a course is made up of modules, modules are made up of lessons, lessons are made up of content blocks. So when we come here, when we put in a module tag, right, we're acknowledging, here's our module, which I just called introduction. It automatically put in a lesson because a module can't exist in the world of LeaderGuide Pro without a lesson. So just like terminal objectives can't exist without an enabling objective. But I can now highlight my lesson name and give it a name like whatever I want to. We'll call it welcome. And in this case, because my meta tag for lesson name already exists, I just need to replace the name by clicking AB to AC. So if I was to stop here, we'd have one module called introduction, a lesson called welcome, and all 5 slides fall under lesson 1, under my welcome lesson. But maybe slide 4, and this is why it's kind of, it's nice that the slides change behind you. If your slide decks are set up where you kind of know where you're transitioning from the end of one lesson to the beginning of the next, or from the end of a lesson to the next module, as we're clicking through here, we can now figure out where the next marker needs to be put in place. So maybe slide 5 is going to be my second lesson, and I'll call this housekeeping, if I could spell. Right, and I can just add that in. And so now when I'm done, if I'm going to stop at this point, but if you had, you spend as much time as you need, slides 1, 2, and 3 are going to fall on my lesson called welcome. Slides 4 and 5 fall onto my second lesson called housekeeping. Now with it's set up the way I want it, I'll just click Save Changes. I'm going to click Close. And then we get to this final dialog box where we're going in and we're choosing our image quality and our formats. You know, what are we bringing over? Is it just our slides or just our notes? We talked a little bit about this, or we talked about this, you know, last week, and then we're going to dive in next week. We're going to really dive into this options section as well as some of this format and time tags items over here. If you are, I will point out, if you are, can't see it there. If you are bringing in over a table of contents, you know, you're taking time to do this. My guess is, you know, 95% of the time, you're going to bring over all your slides. If you're only bringing over selective slides, more than likely, you're not going to put in a table of contents. You could, but it adds another layer that gets just another layer you got to manage of how you handle things. So if you are just bringing over selective slides out of decks, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more in a moment, this is, I wouldn't put in your table of contents. I would skip that part and bring in your table of contents or add your table of contents right off the LeaderGuide Pro ribbon. But I'm going to select OK. And this is where the documents gets built out, right? It takes our slides and notes, you know, based off what we chose on our choices. It drops these in. We get action completed successfully when it's all done. Wrong one. And so, again, we were talking about getting to your table of contents or building this out. So once it's, you know, to see this, we can always go in the control section, go up to the Go To button, choose Jump to Table of Contents, which is our third choice down, or second choice down. And it should take us to it. Oh, just based off my layout. Because it was kind of the third page, it kind of jumped it to it just based off where I was. But we can now see down in the module section, we've got introduction, our first lesson called Welcome. That's going to have our first 3 slides in it. And then our second lesson's starting over on page 3. But if I click on here, right, we can see here's the slides that have come over. So everything's been brought in. So that's what we're able to do using LeaderGuide Pro to build out your table of contents when we're bringing in slides. It's on that TOC outline markers page. Questions on that one? All right.
I guess the question that sometimes I end up having, iPad, I'll get off on camera here, is when you goof and you don't do the table of contents right, or after you look at it, you want to make adjustments, it's hard to go back, right, to it.
Yeah,
to
once
edit
you've actually brought in your LeaderGuide Pro document or brought in PowerPoint kind of with your table of contents, at that point, I wouldn't worry about doing it off the PowerPoint. I would just do it right off on the LeaderGuide Pro ribbon and manage it up here in the modules and lesson control section.
Okay.
And add in, right? So let's say we actually wanted another lesson to start, I don't know, at this content block, right? I could come up and I can just click on my lesson button here, give it a name. We'll call it lesson 3. Right? And it would then add in the lesson there. And then we'll talk about how to rebuild our table of contents. Well, actually, we'll do it here, and we can just.
Yeah, because does it change the pagination on that?
It does. So if we go in, when you want to rebuild your table of contents, if we click on the Update All Fields button, which is in the Controls section, it's the page with the exclamation point. It does a few things. It makes sure all our slide numbering's in a row, which we'll talk about in a moment. It makes sure if we've updated the name of modules or lessons that are already in the document or the program title, and then it rebuilds our table of contents. So if I now use this Go To button and jump to my table of contents, it's going to put those in. But, and Nancy just put it up into chat, that when you're adding in items using this module or lesson control, the modules or lesson control section, cursor placement is paramount. It's going to put in the module or lesson directly above where our cursor is located. Right? So if I went into slide 3 here and added in a new module, right, by making sure my cursor's in slide content block 3, right, and I could call it module 2, lesson 2.1, it broke the table, it added in either, in this case, a module page and a lesson page, and then brought everything back together. Now when I rebuild this table of contents by clicking Update All Fields, right, that page with an exclamation point, go to table of contents, right? That's how, if you've already brought in PowerPoints, I wouldn't go back and try to, update your PowerPoints, get that all into place at that moment. I would just build everything over. After the fact, once you get it all set up in your document, we're going to talk about this a little bit next week, but here's our big market tease for a third session. One of the features, if you've got everything set up, you've got all your modules and lessons and basically the tags, well, what would become tags on that TOC marker outlines, under special, you can come back in and you can update your PowerPoint tags, which will open up that dialog box, and now you could then manipulate it and send that back into the PowerPoint document. But I wouldn't do that until you had everything set up exactly the way you wanted in your facilitator guide or your participant guide, whichever one you're pulling from. But we'll talk about next session. But did that answer your question, Nancy?
Yes, thank you. Perfect.
You're welcome. All right. So we are going to be talking at this point about selective slides. So adding selective slides, the way this would work, and I set this off as a separate item because it's one of those ones where I think the wording that we would normally use about bringing in new slides doesn't necessarily line up with the functionality. And so what I'm trying, I guess, if you were to say, Pat, I was trying to add in a few extra slides that were in my PowerPoint deck into my existing LeaderGuide Pro document, that's technically not an add. It's going to be a replace. Adding selective slides really is, at the highest level. If we're in LeaderGuide Pro, right? I'm going to get into the add functionality as if I was going to be adding in a document. I'm going to cancel it out before it's all done. But if I wanted to add a selective slide or a selective slides, when we on this last importing slides dialog box, and I came in, under number, if I mark selective, this is where I can say I want to bring over slides 1 to 3, 7, 9 to 24. Click OK, and it would bring those in. I'm not going to do this at this moment just for time purposes of where we are at the moment. But that's technically how you would go about adding selective slides. Now, what we would end up doing, I think, you've brought over slides you've brought over slide deck into your PowerPoint guide. And then at some point there's a new slide that's added in, right? There's now a new slide 4 and there was 20 slides and there's now 21 slides because there's technically a new slide 4 and everything else is shifted down. How do we handle that? That's actually a replace item, and we're actually going to talk about that in probably about 10 minutes. So just wanted to say, if you're going to be adding selective slides, technically you're just bringing in a few of an entire deck, but changing over slides because we've made changes to a deck is always going to be in the replace functionality. All right.
Pat, I have a question.
Sure.
So the selective, is that like if you have to combine 2 decks and only certain slides from one deck need to go into another, or does it all have to be within one deck?
So that's a great question. So it could be like you're bringing, you've got a deck that's got a whole bunch of hidden slides that aren't really used, but you're still having them in there, or you've marked them to not, you don't want to bring them over. You could do the selective range for that. Or you have a second deck, right? We're taking slides 1, 7, and 9 from deck 1, and slides 2, 4, and 7 from deck 2, and you want to bring those all into a single document, a single guidebook. That's where you kind of do the selective. I don't just, over the years, I don't see a lot of people adding just selective slides. I think they really set up their PowerPoints in a way of here's what's going to be in, and then bring them all over. But it's there for those 5 to 10% times where you need it.
We're going to be one of those times I have to make 72 facilitation guides based off of 6 PowerPoints and all needing different slides and different locations and different formatting.
Okay. Well,
all right.
We can definitely have a conversation when that comes up.
Okay.
But this was actually an amazing segue when we want to talk about adding in multiple decks. So thank you, Carol. All right. So when it comes time for, let's say we've got multiple decks you want to bring in, how does this work? So we're going to use my existing example, or the one we've been building out. So in this case, right, I've got my document, right? We've brought in, our slides. They've put in they've brought in everything that we needed. Maria, completely understand that you've got to go. This recording, I will get this recording up sooner than I did last week. But any questions that come up, please let us know. Natalie, I see that you've got your.
Yeah, I'm trying it. It's not bringing them in. I've done it about 5 times.
Okay. Well, we can meet separately and we can take a look to see what's happening.
I just want to let you know.
Sure. Okay. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. When we want to add in an additional deck, right? We've brought in our first deck. I would just make sure we've got the next deck we want to bring in set up. So in this case, I've got, another PowerPoint deck set up. This one doesn't have any notes, but it's the one I had on hand. But what I can do, I just go in, and this one doesn't, when we do an add of another deck, this is probably one of the places that slide or cursor placement really doesn't matter. It's just going to drop it at the end of our document. If we go under special, we choose add. Right, we make our choices on the different items that we want. Right, I'm just keeping mine the same, putting my image into column 2, my notes beneath. I would choose the PowerPoint deck I want. So in this case, there's my second one. And normally I would recommend only having one PowerPoint deck open. I've got a few, and then I've got the deck I've been using during the session. But best practice, do not have, just keep open the one or two deck, the deck that you're currently working out of. In this case, depending, like this is one, like if you look at mine, this one's got, just based off of how I built the deck, it technically had a series of tags and then I was duplicating slides. So these tags have all carried over. So this isn't one where I want to keep this, right? I'm just going to erase all my markers. Now, generally, you can go through here and put in, you know, each slide, or you could, when you're adding a second deck, you could go in and put in all your slide, you know, what's your new lesson, your new module called, all of those things. You know, put in all your markers. For time purposes, I'm not going to do it, but you could do that, and that will all carry over. But I'm going to click close, right? I'm going to keep all my options the same. And it's basically creating, you can see above my LeaderGuide Pro logo, it's creating all the, it's converting everything into images, bringing them over. What I should have done is I should have chosen not to bring over notes on this one because I didn't have any notes. But this was, we'll say I did this on purpose. If you don't have notes and you choose to bring over notes, you're going to end up with a blank notes PowerPoint block. But what ends up happening, right at the bottom of what I brought in, it dropped in that second deck. Right? And now I could go through, and I tend to just bring in my decks, and then if I'm using multiple ones, and then putting in my modules and lessons right off the ribbon like we showed with Nancy's question. But again, you could go through and you could mark up, put in those outline markers, and it would add those in as they were going. But that's simple enough. You got one deck, multiple decks, you know, you've got 6 to bring in. You could just go through and bring each one in as you go. Carol, I see you got a question.
I'm not sure if you already said that, but when you bring in those new lessons, I didn't realize that's what it does. Were you saying you go back to the table of contents, insert the name, so then the name appears in the words? Like see how it says lesson 2.1? Like, does that automatically go in the table of contents also?
So this was set up, you know, my lesson 2.1 was brought in previously when I put in that module.
Okay.
I added a second module in because it just added my PowerPoint to the end of my document, right? The end of my document was lesson 2.1. And so it brought it in at the bottom place, which was right here. So if this is a new module or a new lesson, I would now just need to put my cursor into that content block, right? And I could now give it a new name. You know, in this, you know, I did a lesson, but it could be a module, right? And now that's in there. And if I update all fields, right, which was this button here, if I, you know, just so you can see it, there is my table of contents built out with that information.
Cool, thanks.
So that's how we go about adding in multiple decks. All right. And I know we're about 10 minutes from the top of the hour, and we're through about 2/3 of what I wanted to go through today. Thankfully, the last ones, other than one item, which I think I'm going to push over to next week, just because I want to give it the proper time it needs, which is when you're looking to replace your slides off of when you restart by module. That one, which was the 10th item in our agenda, we're going to push off to next week, but we can get through everything else that I had set up for today. All right, which actually brings us to, let's talk about updating slide numbers. So slide numbering is actually handled, and this is one of those ones where there's actually 2 possible terms, or this term actually could apply for 2 different things. So we'll look at it in both ways. First one is, let me get back over here. Nope, wrong one. This one. All right, when we set up our preferences, right, when I went into LeaderGuide Pro preferences, And this document is set up as sequential. I set this one up as, or I set my preferences to restart by module. If I ever wanted to change, if I've set it for absolute or restart by module, if I ever, if that was what this document was set up for, but you want to get it back to sequential, the way you would end up doing that, under special, in the PowerPoint section, there's reset slide numbering. And if you hover your cursor over it, it will give you like a tool tip. And basically, it tells you, it resets the slide numbering in the document to sequential. If you're set up as sequential and you want it to now be restart by module or to absolute, the way you have to do that would be you would come under extract on the ribbon, and you would go from first you would set your preference from sequential to either absolute or restart by module, and then you would do an extract so that you'd still have your sequential document, but the new one is set up as restart by module or as absolute. So that's one way of updating slide numbering, and that's really at the document level, how are we handling the numbering. But I think the one that you're probably going to have more often is where we've added in a new slide. Right, so in this case, if we see what we can see on the page, I've got two slides. I've got slide 1 and slide 2. Well, let's say there's now a new slide. Right, there's a new slide 1. So I've gone in and I've inserted in slide block 1. If we now look at this document, notice it's slide 1, slide 1, slide 2. My numbering isn't right. So this is where, if I go into, again, it's going to be on the control section, it's update all fields, the page with an exclamation point. When we click on this, it goes through, it makes sure it updates all my page numbering, it rebuilds my table of contents. It also puts all my slide numbers in a sequential order. So when I click on this and it runs through, it should do this. And of course, because we're live, nothing ever works the way it's supposed to. So let me hop over to this one. Let's add in PowerPoint slide block. Right, I'm just going to add in a second one. So if you notice, we've got 1, 2, 3, 2, 3. When I clicked update all fields, it went through. It's now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So when we want to update our numbering throughout the document, sequentially, update all fields. We've been popping in and out of this document, which is probably why this one has gone a little funky. If you're set up for restart by module or for absolute, when we click update all fields, it puts it in sequential order. So even if your modules are, if module 2 is supposed to start at slide 1, when we click update all fields, it's still going to mark them 1 through however many slide content blocks are in the deck. When we click the tag button, which is just above it, which is short for training at a glance, this marks up time markers, it builds out the training at a glance, but it also then applies our slide numbering sequencing. So at this case, it would then go through and restart every slide to slide 1, or every module to slide 1, if restart by module is set up as what it was. So this is where the secondary options, not the default options, right? The absolute and restart by module is applied by clicking the tag button after clicking update all fields. So kind of, for me, a best practice, what I like to do is if I click the update all fields button, I will generally then click the tag button. It just makes sure everything's kind of set up in my document correctly in either case. If my document's set up as sequential numbering, by clicking tag, it's not going to do anything, it's not going to change anything. But if my document's set up by restart by module or absolute, it makes sure everything's set. And then it also makes sure if I've updated time markers or anything else in the document, all of that's updated all at the same time. So for me, I update all fields, I click tag, and then I click save. That's kind of my workflow process. All right. Questions there? All right. So I'm going to actually close out this document at the moment, just because it started acting a little funky. And the one thing, by some of the funkiness that what ends up happening when I'm showcasing some of these things is I'm popping around and I'm flipping features or changing items on and off as we go through a document during these live. But what ends up if normally you're not going to be making all these changes or popping from here to here all at one time. So some of these live issues, you aren't going to see because you're just not making as many, playing around with stuff as much as I am. That's just kind of side note. All right. So I know, and we are going to probably run a few minutes over. So obviously, if you guys can't stay, I understand. I do want to hit a few of these other items, so they will be on the recording if you can't stay. Again, the big one we're not going to talk. We'll cover next week, which is updating slides when it is restart by number. But we want to look at what if we're going to be replacing all our slides in our document. So if we want to use the replace function, how do we go about this? So I'm going to use this sample document that I have open right here. So if we want to do a replace, right? In this case, I've got a blank document, I don't have any slide images in here, but maybe if you did, it's going to function the exact same way. But the way we do replace, again, we go to controls, we go to special, we choose replace. Right? Are you replacing PowerPoint or Keynote? So we're going to click yes for PowerPoint. We would choose the PowerPoint deck that we want. Right? So we'll choose this one because it's a smaller one. And when we do a replace, we choose, just like before, we choose our image quality, we choose our format so we can control print quality and file size. But notice there's a couple of the adding sections grayed out. In the transfer section, we can either transfer just our slides or just our notes. We can't do both, which you can do during the add. So if you were updating both your slide content block and your notes content block, you would have to do replace 2 times. Once for your slides and then once for your notes. But we're going to do slides, replace, and in our case, we're going to do all of them. So I just click OK, and it would replace, this is double checking. Do you want to make sure, where are the slides going? So in this case, I'm going to put them into column 2. But if it wasn't the choice, you would click no, and now you can type either 1, 2, or 3. If you have a 3 column, if it's a 2 column, it would be either you can type 1 or 2, and it would put your image into into the corresponding content block. But keep in mind, it's a 1-for-1 replacement. So whatever's in that slide content block or in that cell block would be removed and the new slide image goes in there. But we're going to leave ours at 2. And it runs through. And it brings over those slides. right? So in this case, that PowerPoint deck is currently only showing 3 slides, so that's what it brought in. Or 3 slides that aren't hit, the other slides are currently marked as hidden, if I remember correctly. Right, so on this one, notice slide 2 and slide 3 are hidden, hence why they didn't come over. All right, so that's the idea of replacing all our slides. Special, replace, and we choose to do all of them. All right. So what if we just need to replace a specific slide? Which is actually, when we talked about adding, you want to add a selective slide or adding a specific slide into a document, where I said, our add is about, selective is just bringing over a few slides from a single document. It's not like we've gone and made an update to a document. All right, so let's use this example that we were just looking at. So in this slide deck, right, that I had 5 slides, notice my slide 2 and my slide 3 are actually hidden. And maybe, I forgot I'd hit them. But again, I'm going to actually pretend like I did this on purpose. So I'm going to unhide these. Right, so now, in this case, slides 2 and 3 aren't, I'll just save that. What slide 2 in my PowerPoint is not what I wanted at slide 2 here, right, or slide 3. So if I just want to replace slide 2 so it updates to the correct slide, again, I'm going to come under Special. I'm going to choose Replace. I'm going to say yes for PowerPoint. Choose my PowerPoint deck. Interesting. Let me do this again. What I was saying interesting too normally what we should see, and so we're going to probably have to cover this one next session as well while I look at this, I could actually do all of them. I should be able to do a selective. Let me just try one thing to see. Just wondering because if there was those blank ones. So yeah. So normally what we'll do, and we'll go through this beginning of next week, we would mark this as selective, and then we could say, I just want to bring over slide 2. Or I want to bring over slides 2, 3, 7 to 12. You could do that. But for whatever reason, that's not showing, so I'm going to have to see what's happening there. All right, so that's all the joys of doing all these things live. So I guess just with the fact that we are 5 minutes over and this item has come up, we will, starting next session, we are going to be looking at a few other items. We'll bring over some items from this week that we didn't get to. So we're going to go, we'll basically start high level replacing. We'll look at replacing all slides, replacing slides, just a specific slide. We will then look at restarting, if we're going to have to, the process, if we've restarted by module, how we go about that, and then dive into the last few items which is, we're going to be looking at, what if we wanted to bring over the text that's on our text box? The text that's in a text box on the slides. Or we want to, we brought over our slides and we need to resize them. So we're going to be kind of looking at the frosting on the cake there. So that session is next Monday, the 27th. Let me just make sure I've got this set up correctly. All right. Yeah, so next Monday, 27th, 1 o'clock will be session 3 of this masterclass. Just a few other events. The following on December 6th, we're going to be doing a class on the Stream Deck, which is a tool that I use for virtual producing, but I also use it in development to make my life easier. So we're going to talk about that, do a session on that. And then on December 11th, with the holiday season upon us, we're going to have our holiday extravaganza user group, allowing you to give the gift of better training materials next year. So those are some upcoming events. I did want to point out, last thing that's out here is the record. I'm going to work this afternoon on getting this the recording put up, I'll send out an email. The recordings, if you go to our website, so greatcirclelearning.com, and you go under Watch and Learn, this is where all the different recordings of all our sessions are out there. We'll probably put together a page for the masterclass, which will have all the sessions on there. But there's the recording from last week, as well as that. For the upcoming events, this is available under the events section, and you will be able to come in and register for any of the upcoming events. And in the next, by the beginning of December, we'll load up the next, what's kind of happening in January and February, so you can plan accordingly. But with that, obviously I kept you guys 8 minutes over, and we had a couple things that weren't working the way that we were hoping, or they should have been. So we're going to look at that. Nathalie, I will take a look and see what's going on, for you and the add functionality. So I'll send you an email link so that we can see exactly what's going on. But other than that, I hope you guys have a great day and have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I will see you guys all next week. All right, take care.